Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my humble home in Livingston, Montana. Okay, before I get started here, let me have a little sip of coffee. I always like to keep the vocal pipes lubricated there a little bit. Okay, this is another one of my childhood stories, so if you don't like my storytelling, I suggest you go do something more important with your time. Okay, this situation happened when I was sitting here before I started up this movie file, trying to get the time frame right, and I do believe I was 13 years old. You got that? 13. 13 or 14 years old, and I lived in a place called Ronan, Montana. That's on US 93 north of Missoula, just below Flathead Lake. Okay. Now, back in them days, when I was growing up through the 50s and 60s and whatnot have you, you just didn't go get a job anywhere. Like, we had no McDonald's, no fast foods. We did very few dude ranches and all the kind of stuff that they got in Montana now. Mostly set up for like tourists and stuff like that. Stuff like that just didn't exist. Us Montanans just took care of ourselves and our needs and performed tasks that we needed to do and whatnot have you. But the point being that jobs for kids were not very plentiful, and you had to really hustle to make a dollar, man. I'm going to tell you that right now. And I'm not going to sit here and get into everything that I did as a kid because it was a lot. Most of it was ranch work, okay? I did other things too, but most of it was ranch work. But this one in particular, the season, if you will, or time of the year, I got a job working for the Ronan Mountain View Cemetery. You got that? Ronan Mountain View Cemetery. And I worked for this old boy. He's long done since gone, and I liked him a lot and everything, except for he was kind of a lazy bugger. But his name was Harry Owens, and he hired me. He was the groundskeeper for the cemetery. It was his responsibility to keep the graves looking good, grass mowed and all that, which meant that, me being his sidekick, I did most of the work. Trust me on this. Yeah. But now listen, my main job was to fill in graves. I'm going to ask you people something. How many of you people at the age of 13, 14 years old was working filling in graves? I bet there ain't a single one of you. But that's the kind of stuff that I used to have to do to put clothes on my back because my parents made us kids work for our clothing. It's just that simple. Way different time period and way different rules and way different way of living back in them days compared to the garbage and the nonsense that's going on now. Okay. I was sitting here before I started up this file trying to get the time periods all squared around and everything, and I do believe that I was, like I say, I was around 13, 14 years old when this stuff was going on, and in that area that I lived in, all funerals were at the same time, but I just can't quite remember if it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but it was one of the two. Now you got to remember, I'm 68 years old, and I was doing this stuff way back when I was 13 years old. And besides keeping the grounds all spruced up and mowed and everything, my main job was filling in graves. Now, in case a lot of you don't know this, they use a front-end loader, a front-end digger, or whatever you want to call it, a bucket to dig a grave, but most graves are filled in by hand. They got to do it that way so they can tamp the dirt real good and tight around not the casket, but the great big the vault, the great big concrete thing that holds the casket. Because if you don't, the grave is going to prematurely sink in. It's going to shrink anyway, but you know, unless they've got some better way of doing it now, I'm unaware of it. But back in the day, you filled in a grave with a shovel. It's just that simple. And you got down there and you jumped on top of the vault, the big concrete vault, and you took the handle and you stabbed around and everything, so so that you poke the dirt down and all that. Okay, kind of like you put in a fence post. Well, most funerals were usually over with like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours at the longest, depending on the mourners and people talking and people reminiscing about the good old boy or the gal that died or whatever have you. Now, Harry, what he had me do is he had me hide behind the tool shed where we kept all our tools and everything until the service was over with, and then he'd have me come out there and help the mortician lower the casket down into the vault and help him put the lid on and all that. And I don't know if you guys know it, but a casket sits on this kind of a sling-like thing, that you crank down. It's gear operated, if you will. You literally lower, the casket down into the vault and everything, and with these great big nylon straps. And then when it gets down there, you can slip them out and put the top on, and then you start filling the grave in. Okay. Well, this one particular time, I up until that time, I'd filled in about 10 graves, 11 graves, something like that, and I never really did like it too awful much. I mean, it wasn't the most, I didn't mind the work, but, hey, come on, filling in graves felt kind of weird, standing on them vaults and everything. And you guys are going to have to put your imaginations to work here, or this story isn't going to mean a hill of beans. On this one in particular funeral, a matter of fact, it was the last funeral that I ever covered, so to speak, but the funeral was running late. It was running about an hour to an hour and a half later than normal. And what we wanted to get them funerals over with so that we had enough time to fill in the grave and everything and make it look all rounded off, all real nice and everything before it got dark. Because up here in Montana, it gets dark fairly early, at certain times of the year. Well, this miserable Harry Owens, this dude that I was supposed to be working for, every friggin' time we had a funeral, everybody, the well-wishers and everybody would leave and all that, and the mortician would leave, and he'd tip me a couple of bucks, for helping him and whatnot have you. And there would be Harry right behind him, tearing off to town. He'd always go, "Okay, Jim, you know what to do. I gotta go get coffee." Now who the hell drinks coffee at, like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon besides me? No, but that's what old Harry'd always say. Gotta go get me some coffee, Nonsense. Bullshit. I'm going to tell you what old Harry was doing. He was just skipping out of work. Okay, this one in particular funeral I was taking care of, I was running way behind, like an hour and a half, no kidding. And boy, it was starting to get dark, and I was only about halfway, that grave was only about halfway filled in. I know, because, the ground was right up to my shoulders, boy, and I was looking around and everything. Well, this just goes to show you how the human imagination can play tricks on you. Now, you guys are going to have to pay real close attention if you're going to get the meat of what I'm trying to say here. The long shadows started coming. It started getting a little darker, and there was an old hoot owl up in the tree, whoo, a whoo, a whoo, doing that, making those sounds that are kind of spooky, kind of like Halloween-like kind of deal. And there was these people that owned some property right to what would it have been, which doesn't matter, to the south of the cemetery. They were about 100 yards or so, 75 yards or so away from the cemetery. And they had peacocks. Do you guys know what peacocks sound like at all? They let out a yelp. It sounds like help. Yelp, yelp. Oh, I'm doing it all haywire, but it's high pitched and it sounds just like help. Well, okay, here I am shoveling like a madman, trying to beat darkness. I got a hoot owl right above my head, hooting and everything. I got these peacocks, with this yelp, yelp, And man, I'm telling you, I kept looking around and everything, and things just kept getting creepier and spookier, and nightfall. Well, unfortunately, nightfall basically came upon me. I did not beat. I ran out of daylight. Because somebody else was burning daylight for me. There, that's a good way of putting that. But I am telling you, I never shoveled so fast in all my life. The more the sound effects echoed in my ear and perked up my paranoia and everything, the faster I shoveled and all that. And that was another thing, too. Whenever you got done filling in a grave, you always had at least 15 wheelbarrows worth of dirt left over, which we had to wheel at the other end of the cemetery. We had a special pile where we kept this dirt, okay? And I had to do all of that stuff. And I had to round the grave off real good and proper and everything. And by the time, ladies and gentlemen, I get all this stuff done and get the shovels put away and everything like that, it was dark and I was paranoid. I'm talking about paranoid. I'm talking about shaking in my little boots, because my imagination was running wild. I was thinking that there were spooks running through the graveyard. You got to remember, I was only like 13 years old, and I kept imagining that there was, things popping up behind headstones and all kinds of stuff like that. Now, my transportation out to the Ronan Cemetery, the Ronan Mountain View Cemetery, if you guys can look it up right there on Google if you want to, I think that cemetery set like 3 miles out of Ronan or some east of Ronan. Well, my transportation was a Honda 90, an old broke down Honda 90. I don't know if you guys remember those old Honda 90s back in the day. This thing here, it had the front light was always shorting out, and sometimes it'd work. Sometimes it wouldn't, and it was just a terrible piece of junk, because back in them days, that's all, we were poor folk, and there wasn't no Cadillacs in my family. Anyway, I was so freaked out and so paranoid by the time I got that grave filled in, because remember, I'm out there all by myself. Old Harry's in town drinking coffee or whatever the hell he was doing. Man, I'll tell you, when it come time from when I knew my job was done, I made a sprint for that Honda 90. Yeah, I really did. I made a sprint for that thing. I in one swift motion, I jumped on and kicked the kickstand out of my way, and I didn't even bother to use the kicker to start the motor, because back in them days it didn't have no electric motor, nothing. You used to have to kickstart it, But I just simply turned on the ignition key and pushed it down the hill, because the whole cemetery set on a hill, when the roadway goes, went downhill, and then you went out onto the main access road. And man, I remember I just pushed that thing down the hill as fast as I could, put it in gear, pop that clutch, fired up that Honda 90, and I'm doing sideways fishtailing out of there and everything, and I got on the main road, man, and I remember I was just as fast as I could, and I kept looking in back of me because I thought for sure there was legions of demons, ghosts, and by that time my imagination had completely run away with itself, because that's the way the mind will do you. There's a lot of people that are still guilty of that to this day. Over stuff a lot less than this story I'm telling you, but I'll leave that go for some other time. But I don't know if you enjoy this story, but that was really about all there was to it, except for the fact that I ended up having to quit that job. I filled in about a total of, 14, 15 graves or something, but I started having nightmares really bad. I'm a little bit young to be filling in graves, but this is a true story, and all of that stuff. And I remember screeching up to my mom's house, and I thought, man, phooey with this job, man. I ain't doing this, And so there you are, man. There's my childhood, grave filling story for today. But the thing about it is, I had another brother of mine. Well, actually, I had three other brothers of mine in this particular instance that were working, and every one of them took a turn at filling in graves, and they did the same thing. Quit. They do like 10, 12 graves and go, this is not for me. It really wasn't the work. In my case, it wasn't the work so bad. It was being out there in that graveyard by yourself, with all these sound effects going on, all this weirdism. Okay, what do I got here? 17 minutes, good God. This is redonkulous, Okay, ladies and gentlemen, sorry I bored you and everything, but that's my story for today. And adios, my friends, and we shall see you on down the trail, and take care of yourselves. And where's the button to let me out of here? Adios.